I followed my wife to secretly film her affair, and I discovered a shocking truth: my name is Jonathan, and I have never experienced such intense anger before. At that moment, I found myself wanting to confront two people. Why am I so angry? Let me explain. It all started about 5 weeks ago, when my wife began to experience a marked transformation, like a chameleon. Right before my eyes, she began to reject intimacy, including physical contact in a husband and wife relationship. This immediately aroused my suspicions, as I had once had a girlfriend who cheated on me, and that experience had taught me a bitter lesson. I had never mentioned my past with my first wife to my second wife, but I didn't think it would make a difference. During the second week of her transformation, I decided to investigate further. I'm not the type to seek help from private detectives or anyone else to solve my problems. No, I'm a hands-on person and prefer to deal with problems myself. Thank you very much. I followed her during her lunch break when she parked at that motel and walked quickly to room 104. I knew she was cheating on me, as her job did not require her to deal with clients outside the workplace at all. In fact, she did not interact with clients at all, as she worked in the record-keeping department. Discovering her infidelity made me suffer, but it was far less painful than the ridicule, insults, and contempt she had subjected me to. The man she was dating was a colleague from a different department. I heard that his career was progressing rapidly and that he was quickly climbing the corporate ladder. After observing them on 3 dates within 2 weeks, I decided to take action and address the issue head-on. I was too stingy to spend my hard-earned money to confirm what I already knew, so I waited, knowing that just behind that door, my wife was lying in the arms of another man. It was a nerve-wracking encounter. I had to confront them and gather evidence. In my current emotional state, I could still bring legal proceedings against her employer for negligence in allowing this to happen. I suspect that the rising Mr. will soon become the soon-to-be former Mr. I needed photographic evidence, and then I needed to serve my ex-wife with divorce papers. Wife files for divorce. While we were standing there, the locks on the house were changed, and I just paid the locksmith before leaving the house. I have reorganized all our joint finances and divided them equally. Over the past 2 weeks, I have also cancelled all our credit cards. I have taken every measure, and now the final turmoil is about to begin. I am not sure how Simone will react. I believe she may feel relief rather than sadness, although guilt may overwhelm her soon. My lawyer, with extensive experience in divorce, assures me that once she retains her lawyer, the guilt will disappear. Do I love her? You may be curious to know that I now despise her completely and openly, but deep down I am torn between the belief that she really does love me and the belief that this is just a terrible mistake on her part, a lapse in judgment that we can perhaps repair, but I know logically this is impossible. I can't accept a betrayal of my trust. I have no trust left in her. I still feel love for her, I just haven't yet come to terms with this sudden and complete change. Update: the motel manager gave me the room key, a $100 bill and a promise not to damage the room as payment for the key. He is a decent man, and I believe that my wife and her lover chose this location for their secret meetings. He also mentioned something about his ex-wife and how we were similar in some ways. After inserting the key, I quietly opened the door, walked into the room, and left the door ajar. I aimed the camera and entered the room completely. I like this digital camera. I thought to myself, and I was grateful that she had given it to me for my birthday 3 months ago. She shouted at the man to leave her, while he angrily tried to stand up. I took a few more pictures, capturing her awkward posture. Simone cried as she tried to hide, while he insisted on his foolish behavior. I secretly hoped he would make that choice, which made my next move seem very natural. Who are you? Get out or I'll kick your ass. I announced that I was her soon-to-be ex-husband, and his ass got kicked, which was debatable. I didn't think you'd kick me. As he approached to put down the camera, I moved to the side, turned slightly to the right, and I let him walk to my left and put down the camera. I started to turn quickly, while swinging my arm hard, and smashed my fist into his face. His feet lifted off the ground from anger, pain and a hint of fear. I was afraid I would lose control and hurt him, and he didn't deserve that from me at all. I must have been angrier than I thought. I bent down to check his pulse, and there it was, so I breathed a sigh of relief. I heard Simonetta babbling on and on about something, and then I turned to face her, and she suddenly fell silent, fear choking her voice. I could tell she had never seen me like this before, and I was definitely much better looking than the man she had breakfast with this morning. Enjoy the situation, he is all yours now. I don't want anything more to do with you and your deceitful ways. She sat there, tears streaming down her face, trembling, hugging herself, afraid to look me in the eye. I've noticed this happening more and more recently, more and more often, but now she knows I know the game is up. She glanced at me standing next to her lover, and I saw her tremble, but her eyes didn't linger long. These are the standard divorce papers. I want a divorce. The locks on the house have been changed. I have opened a bank account with everything you deserve. You have already received the summons. It is over between us. Thank you. I turn to leave and hear her pleading with me as I walk out the door. Wait, please let me explain, Jonathan, please. I continued walking. I couldn't let her see the look in my eyes, which were full of tears. I knew that if I turned back, I might weaken and deviate from my plan. So many things had happened, and I had so many questions to reconsider. What had once been was no longer. When I returned home, I found the locksmith waiting patiently for me. He had replaced all 3 entry locks, and the garage door opener had been reprogrammed. I thanked him for his quick work and gave him a $20 tip. Sitting in the house that was once our home, I sat at the kitchen table and thought back on the years we had spent together. I couldn't understand why Simone had changed, why she suddenly no longer valued me as she had before. I couldn't find any reason for her behavior. I only knew that our relationship had ended within 5 weeks. The pain and words had turned me into a completely different person. Unfortunately, Simone seemed to have missed this change, just as I had ignored the changes in her. The phone rang and I checked the caller ID to see it was Simone's mother. I answered the phone and she asked what had happened to John. Simone came running in, crying, and said she had ruined your marriage. What happened? I answered, Doris, here's what happened. Simone needs to tell you the details, but to summarize, I found her today at a motel and served her with divorce papers. Doris sounded confused. Why John, I don't understand at all. I explained, Doris, I'm really sorry, you know how much I love you and Sam, this situation is very difficult for all of us, but it has to be this way. Tears were running down my cheeks. Now I really care about Simon's parents, they have been very kind to me throughout the years we have been together. I was deeply affected by the pain and confusion in Doris's voice, and I was grateful that the conversation was taking place over the phone so they wouldn't see my emotional state. Doris insisted that Ed and John, the 2 of you, couldn't possibly have found a solution. I sadly replied that I didn't think so. Doris, this is a serious problem, the kind of life-changing event that can destroy everything. There was a solemn silence on the other end of the line as Doris tried to come to terms with this sudden and terrible news. I felt sorry for her, especially as we had just had dinner with Doris and Sam the night before, and Simone had surprised me by acting close to her parents. I felt a bit left out, naturally, on the way home. However, at Doris and Sam's we had acted like a perfect couple, and I didn't want anyone to see our argument, as I wanted to protect Sam from his daughter's behavior. In hindsight, I should have somehow warned them before taking the measures I just did. Sam's health was not in good shape, as years of hard work and a history of smoking had taken their toll. Although Doris was fit and healthy, she was always worried about Sam. I regretted not having informed them in advance about the chaotic situation. A few days later, my phone rang again. I glanced at the caller display and saw it was Simone's father. I answered the phone and he began to discuss the relationship concerning my daughter's misfortune. Simone confessed everything to her mother last night, and I was there. Can we meet? I want to tell you exactly what happened to her. I felt very good about Simone's parents, so I agreed to meet with Simone's father and then repeated to him what Simone had said to her mother when they talked about me and my decision to serve her with divorce papers. Simon's mother asked, Simon, I'm your mother, and John is like a son to me. I'm sorry to hear that John has served you with divorce papers, but you must tell me what happened. It's not enough to say that John found you in a motel. I want to know all the details, why you were in the motel, and who you were with. Simone explained, Mom, Jonathan and I don't get along as well as we did when we first got married. He's busy with several projects and his work is taking over, affecting our personal lives. We've discussed this problem and it's seriously affecting our relationship. I know that in a few months, his hard work will likely result in a very promising promotion. Meanwhile, at work, Greg found an error I made in some employee records. It wasn't a major error, but it was a serious oversight on my part that could jeopardize my upcoming promotion, pay rise and career progression. Greg was the type of person who was used to taking advantage of this kind of information, and basically blackmailed me into having lunch with him one day. This eventually led to intimacy, as a one-off arrangement to prevent the serious consequences of the mistake I had made, and I didn't like the situation at the time. The only thing that made me agree was that Jonathan and I had not had a good relationship for the past 6 months and our intimacy had gradually diminished. It was not until the first meeting with Greg that I realized I had also been missing out on life experiences that others had. Jonathan had always been my only partner and I had never been with any other man. We first met Greg in his office at lunchtime, and everyone left as usual, leaving me alone. Greg had been waiting for me, and had brought a small bottle of my favorite wine and some cheese and crackers. Usually our lunch break lasted an hour, and my colleagues would go to a local restaurant or a street vendor. I would usually buy something from the street vendor and go to the park to find solitude. On the first day, no one seemed to notice our absence. Greg was even more cordial than I had initially thought he would be, and I had thought he was a despicable blackmailer. That encounter was a relief for me. After that day, I found myself desiring it more, even though I knew it was wrong, even though I was still in love with my husband, Jonathan. Greg treated me like something of his property or something connected to him. At the end of that lunch, I could let go of everything and be someone completely different. Greg and I did things together that I had never done with my husband. We had just managed to straighten things out. We had managed to solve the problem before our colleagues returned, and when I left his office, I was less angry with him than I had been at the beginning of the day. Later that day, when I tasted his kiss, I couldn't help thinking about the next time. It was an unexpected thought that revealed once again how much I longed for Greg. Greg wanted more than just a one-off encounter. The next day, he brought it up with me, and we had another office romance. Over the next 2 weeks, he started making negative comments about Jonathan. When we were intimate, Greg would badmouth Jonathan, even suggesting that Jonathan might cheat. Considering the relationship in our family, I gradually accepted Greg's point of view, and I began to belittle and criticize Jonathan to everyone except you and Dad. I was afraid that you and Dad would see through me, so when you and Dad were around, I pretended to be a loving wife. Just before the motel date, Jonathan and I grew distant, and Greg and I met formally from the outside. Greg suggested that it would be safer to use motels as meeting places until we could come up with a better plan. His wife was starting to suspect something, and he thought people at the company might have noticed that we were spending a lot of time together, since we didn't work in the same department. We never discussed leaving our spouses, we never wanted to leave our spouses, we just met to satisfy our physical needs. I didn't realize that Jonathan had love, respect, and understanding. I abandoned these qualities in order to satisfy my carnal desires. Greg dominated me in a way that Jonathan respected me and would never take anything without my full consent. Greg, on the other hand, did whatever he wanted and bossed me around. His wife provided him with emotional support, while my emotional bond with Jonathan faded and I collided with Greg's passion. Looking back, I realize that I have made the biggest mistake of my life. 10 weeks ago, it was too late to fix things. That day, when Jonathan walked into the room, it took me by surprise. I panicked and tried to cover myself, pushing Greg away. As Greg got up, I looked at John's face and realized he was a complete stranger. His eyes made me feel strange. Jonathan started taking pictures of us, and Greg got off the bed, mumbling something I couldn't understand. Jonathan put the digital camera near the table where he was standing. What happened next took my breath away. Greg began to close in on Jonathan, menacingly. I saw Greg take off, flying about 2 feet in the air, before falling on his back on the floor. Jonathan's gaze met mine, and I couldn't look away. I tried to cover myself with the sheet, feeling scared, embarrassed and, above all, deeply ashamed. Jonathan shouted at me and threw a few folded papers onto the bed. I heard something about divorce papers. I stared at the sheets, unsure if my husband would hurt me too. I felt scared, embarrassed and ashamed. Suddenly, Jonathan turned and started walking out the door, taking the camera with him from the table. I shouted at him, although I don't remember what I said, except that I felt like whatever I said sounded hollow. Later, I took a shower and didn't go to see Greg. I no longer cared if he was alive or dead. I found out when the motel manager came to check the room that Jonathan had bought a key from him. The manager looked at me disdainfully and said that he had found his wife with another man and that the room was similar to the one Jonathan had rented, which was the real reason he had given Jonathan the key. He told me that I had really screwed up and that he didn't need to tell me, I already knew. I had just thrown away the best thing in my life just because I was caught up in an affair and stupidly believed that I had something special. The next day, she came to the office and there were 3 people waiting in my office: the company president, the human resources manager, and someone I thought was the company lawyer, asking me how Greg and I were involved in this matter, and I explained everything without reservation. As I passed through the office, I saw the expressions on the faces of my colleagues, the same ones I had seen when I arrived at the office that morning. I knew I would be fired that day, but I was wrong. First, our representative assured me that the initial encounter with Greg had been an extortion attempt, and then they had me sign some papers about Greg and me. The office, and left the company before lunch. The company could not keep me, but due to Greg's initial extortion, they had to offer me severance pay. Other than that, I was fired. Greg was escorted out of the building by security and handed over to the police. It turned out that he had been involved in other illegal activities during the questioning. Greg later found himself in serious legal trouble. I later discovered that Greg had been embezzling company funds in various petty ways, such as falsifying, and that these petty actions added up to charges of major crimes. Larson Greg's wife left him with their 3 children and returned to her parents' home in the East. Greg is in prison awaiting trial. At first I was asked to testify, but when I spoke to the district attorney, she realized that my testimony could do more harm than good, so they decided not to let me testify. Greg's lawyer asked me if I was willing to testify for Greg's defense. I explained that I would testify about how Greg initially forced me to be intimate with him and how he later provoked a rift between me and my husband, even if he concluded that I was not a valuable witness. Mom, I really don't know how I could have made such a terrible decision. Her mother replied, Simone, you have made one of the worst mistakes. You have not only disappointed your parents and yourself, but you have also betrayed your husband. You, a young lady, have completely ruined 2 marriages and destroyed your husband's love. Your behavior has hit rock bottom. I still love you because you are my daughter, but I have lost all respect for you. Sam told me that Doris and he had allowed Simone to move in with them. He sounded so distraught, it made me cry too. They are good people and I am sorry they have been dragged into this mess. Update: I understand that if I had warned her parents, Simone might have been warned and I would not have got the necessary photos. Well, I really didn't need it in court, and unless her lawyer took a confrontational approach, the photos would be presented along with sworn statements from 6 different people attesting to their involvement. I hesitated to call it an affair, not sure if Simone was really in love with the man or if she had initially participated willingly. Her father's testimony suggested that Greg may have had some influence on Simone at first. My lawyer made the most of the case against Simone's employer, which had been filed against her. As I was preparing to go to the motel room, he filed the lawsuit with the court, and then spoke to the company lawyer on the phone for 20 minutes. They were very agitated and naturally denied it, but my lawyer mentioned the sworn testimony, and the company suddenly changed its position. According to what my lawyer told me, I knew that Simone, her lover, and possibly other people involved could be fired, unless they could provide a reasonable explanation for their actions. As for I knew that the accusation of an affair against Greg was very strong, given the employer's actions. We had sworn statements from 3 of his colleagues and 1 of hers, testifying to their secret activities at work. Some of the company's supervisors also had suspicions, but no one confronted them or informed me. We have sworn statements from the motel owner and the cleaning lady, plus photos of me, for a total of 6 witnesses as concrete proof that the affair took place. They used the motel to escape the prying eyes of Keo employees while they were on company time, because Greg realized they were becoming too conspicuous. He also knew the company's policy on workplace relationships and ethics, and my lawyer has gathered a lot of information on this. I learned that Simone had been with the other man for more than 5 weeks, and that's when I realized something was wrong. So Simone has only been involved in this for a total of 0 weeks. When I found out about it at the motel 5 weeks ago, I confronted them, and it was one of the hardest moments of my life. So far, I've been through 3 of those moments, and I hope I never have to go through another one as long as I live. After leaving the motel room that day, I felt more numb than I'd ever felt before. Simone was still crying in bed and Greg was still unconscious. The motel manager met me in the hallway. I handed him the key and he put his hand on my shoulder and said something nice to comfort me. He said, "It's tough right now, but everything will be fine. Move on, find yourself, and then find someone else, and you'll be fine. I know it will be painful, and it depends on how much I love her and care about her. Thank you, I've figured it out." Update: Simone has not put up any resistance during the divorce proceedings, and everything has gone very smoothly. I believe that my lawyer and her lawyer were surprised, as she seemed to have completely accepted her fate. Although I could see that she was suffering, at least she wasn't trying to defend herself. Once the divorce proceedings were complete, the proceedings against her former employer also came to an end. They just wanted me to disappear and were willing to pay my lawyer fees, court costs, and offered a substantial sum to ensure that I would never appear in public again. Since then, Simone has faced difficulties. She is alone, unemployed and living with her parents, and the stress is compounded by the fact that her actions have had a profound effect on her parents. The stigma of being a liar will haunt her for a long time. Nevertheless, she has the opportunity to start a new life. I hope she can finally look ahead and stop carrying her pain around with her all the time. Perhaps she has learned her lesson, but only time will tell. I'm glad Greg is going to prison. Now he'll experience intimacy from the other side, hopefully this time from the receiving end. I don't feel sorry for him. He's nothing to me. A man, he's nothing. He has a wife and 3 kids. I saw her once in the chaos of the divorce. She's a charming woman. Greg made a really stupid decision. He had everything, but he threw it all away for a thrill. He must have thought he couldn't get satisfaction from her. I quit my job, much to the shock of my employers. They did their best to convince me to stay, but my personal problems were too serious for me to continue working effectively. After they'd tried their best, they gave me a well-written reference letter, which I accepted. About a year ago, I found a new job on the West Coast and moved there. I met a wonderful young woman who deserves my heart. I still struggle with trust issues, but her ex-husband cheated on her, so we have a common experience. I am a 33-year-old woman who met her 36-year-old husband on a dating site. Because of previous disappointments, I had the impression that most people I met on the site just wanted a purely physical relationship. However, when I met my husband, things were different, because he had long-term plans and goals. As we got to know each other better, I discovered that we had common goals. For example, we came from small families, he has 1 brother, and I am an only child. This similarity made us eager to form a big family and provide our children with diverse support. We went on many dates, and the conversations never stopped. With him, I felt listened to, safe and truly happy. By this time, I had stopped using dating websites and had cut off contact with the chat partners. With him, I felt content and felt like I had become a better person. He always encouraged me to improve. When he proposed to me, I was very excited, but as the wedding approached, I began to feel increasingly nervous and doubted whether marrying at this time was the right decision. Even close friends told me that I was getting married too young and that I might be wasting my youth on one person. On the other hand, my mother assured me that the feeling of nervousness was normal and that my husband was a good man who would take care of me in all aspects of life. This confusion and pressure prompted me to reconnect with a man from a dating site with whom I had previously had a casual relationship. After we met, things happened one after the other, rekindling the passion between us. I never discussed my pre-wedding jitters with my husband, but instead continued to have a secret affair with a man from a dating site. The man from the dating site, and even after the honeymoon was over a few months before the day we got married, I found out I was pregnant with our first child, and now he is 10 years old. We are very happy. My husband has always been involved in all aspects of my son's life, and sometimes I even feel left out. I thought it might be postpartum symptoms, but instead of seeking professional help or discussing it with my husband, I sought comfort from the man on the dating site, and our affair resumed over the next few years. A few years later, we welcomed 2 more sons, currently aged 6 and 3. Our family is our source of happiness, and we are realizing our dream of having a big family. The only regret is that we haven't had any baby girls. My husband's family has no girls, and I don't have any sisters, so having a daughter or 2 is like the last piece of the puzzle. My husband really wants a daughter, but I haven't been able to get pregnant. As time went on, things became more and more frustrating, and intimacy began to feel like an obligation rather than a pleasure. This made me feel stressed, and I didn't have anyone to talk to. My affair partner had to move to another state because of a promotion at work. After almost a year of unsuccessful attempts to get pregnant, we decided to seek help from a specialist. After a series of tests, the doctor confirmed that I was healthy and fertile, but they recommended testing my husband. To our surprise, it turned out that my husband was sterile and unable to father children. This discovery caused me to have concerns I had never considered before, that our children might not be his biological children. My husband was silent for a while, obviously thinking about what I had just said. We didn't say a word on the way home. When we got home, he still didn't discuss the issue with me, but called my mother and asked her to pick up the kids after they left. He questioned me about the father of my children. I tried to reassure him that they were his children, because he had raised them, and I didn't know they weren't his biological children. I made it clear that I would never force him to raise children that weren't his, because this was also news to me. However, he flew into a rage and we started arguing. He accused me of betraying his trust and damaging his health, insinuating that I was unfaithful in my anger. I admitted to having an affair and explained that it was a way for me to cope when I felt trapped and suffocated in our relationship, which gave me a sense of vitality and control. I knew I was not the only woman to feel these things, and it was clear that my husband wanted a divorce and planned to have a paternity test, but I did not want to destroy our happy family. If I knew that my husband was sterile and our children could never be his, would not continue this affair. I feel that my attempt to have another child has completely ruined my life and the lives of my children. I know that what I have done is very bad, but my children are innocent and they deserve a family and a father. I married my husband because I truly love him and not just because he provides security. The only other man I have ever been with is that man because I think having multiple partners would be troublesome. My love for him is different from my love for my husband. I'm just attracted to him, and our relationship is purely physical. He knows I have a husband, and we have boundaries. We don't want more from each other. I've never thought that my children could belong to anyone other than my husband, because we almost always use protection, and I can't imagine anyone other than my husband being the father of my children. My husband is in the process of getting a divorce, and we are already in the process of getting divorced. Unfortunately, when I raised the issue of the children and how this would affect them, he didn't want to hear my pleas. He insisted on custody, mentioning that he had supported 3 children who were not his biological children, and that he might be required to pay child support, so he intended to ensure that he got his money's worth and regarded them as his retirement plan. This made me very sad, and I cried, but he showed no sympathy. My friends told me that this is the consequence of not listening to their advice and wasting your youth on a man. I admit that I betrayed him and I admit that I made a mistake, but his attempt to take the children is the bottom line that I cannot accept. I still love him, and the idea that he wants to take my children is even worse than what I have done. Things escalated quickly, and it seemed that we had reached a point of no return. Initially, we planned to settle out of court, but he refused to pay alimony and belittled me every time we met. He claimed that he would not pay alimony, emphasizing that I had betrayed our marriage. He believes that our sons should not raise his sons in an environment that he considers promiscuous. No, they are my sons. He wants to take my children away from me, and has even managed to turn our eldest son against me. Now my eldest son is acting towards me in a way he has never done before, and our relationship has never been closer. He has always acknowledged me as his mother. He insisted on staying with his father, and when the judge awarded me full custody, considering that I am their biological mother and they have no blood ties to their father, he started throwing tantrums. I suspect that my ex-husband has influenced him to resent me. My life is currently going downhill, and I often feel stressed and depressed. This subreddit is the only place where I feel treated like a human being. I haven't received the first installment of alimony yet, and my son continues to throw tantrums and demand to stay with his father. I've run out of options. I managed to keep the house for the sake of the children, but I'm paying for all the expenses because I don't have the income of a dual-income family. I applied for child support because he raised them and was the only father they knew. He didn't object at first, but now he wants to go back to court to fight for custody. However, I insist that I cannot afford another court battle. I have to rely on him again, which makes me feel like a failure, while at the same time I miss everything we once had.